is when I say, oh, I was going to say when I say to start the recording, then the recording will start. And then at the end of the meeting, we will stop the recording so that the questions that you have can be personal back and forth with Jim so that it won't be recorded for the future. So, and there is a survey, so please take just a moment afterwards as you leave the meeting to fill out this survey because it's important to us to be able to give our funder feedback that they want to know that we're listening to our stakeholders to know what's important to you. So please take time to do that. So now I'm going to say we're going to turn this over to Jim, and this meeting is being recorded, and we're going to start the recording now.
All right. And I was just going to ask if Sandy was going to run my slides again or how we're going to do that. All right. So let's start on slide 1, which is the most exciting one, which is the title page. So this is who I am. My contact information is there. Before I start, I just want to say, if there are any questions, feel free to reach out. You can call, you can text, you can email. Just tell me, you saw me in PC2, and I am happy to do that. So let's go to the next one, which is just my disclaimer. I'm trying to give you the best knowledge I know, but things could be wrong, and talk to me about what's going on. So next one, I'm not necessarily going to introduce myself, but again, you got my contact. I do have a special needs stepdaughter. She has autism. As I was saying before, I came into her life when she was, I don't know, 2-3 years old, I think, and I have been around ever since. And the scary part is she's 19, and that's kind of hard to believe, to be totally honest. All right, next one. So let's start at what we're talking about. One of the things I'm going to do today is do a little review of the Special Needs Trust. And the main reason I do that is simply because the more that we talk about it, the better. First off, what is a trust? It is a separate legal entity, and it can be freestanding, it can be in a will, it can be revocable, it can be irrevocable, and there are tax consequences of doing that. So that's the simple of what a trust is. And I tell everybody to think about it this way. The trustee is the creator. So if you think of it as corporation, that's Henry Ford. The managers can be multiple people because Henry Ford's no longer managing Ford Motor Company. Heck, I'm not even sure if Ford Motor Company exists. I know that they've all merged, so I don't know who's the title name there at this point. But that's similar to a trust. You have a creator, you have beneficiaries. Those are like your shareholders. So that's a good way to look at that. So special needs trust is what we're going to mostly talk about today because that's what's on our topic. And these are done basically for the benefit of a disabled person. They are generally thought of to be supplemental, not for basic needs. And the main goal here is we don't want the beneficiary to compel distribution. So we don't want our special needs party to have the ability to come and get the money. We want a trustee who can manage the money. And the reason we're trying to do that is we're trying to protect SSI, Medicaid, and other need-based income. One of the things that's really important in this arena is parties cannot have over $2,000. It's slightly different for Medicaid, but that's a Social Security number, so that's kind of what I use. Medicaid can be state by state, and it can be, $2,100, $2,500. Those are different kind of numbers. So one of the things that's really important is we want somebody to have money, but we don't want them to have it to lose their benefits. And, that's an interesting question that exists is, do we care about benefits? And that really depends upon what they're receiving as their benefits. So I've had clients, I'm getting $40 from Medicaid or Social Security. Well, who cares about that? But on the other hand, you may be getting medicine that's thousands and thousands of dollars, and that's really, really important. So a special needs trust is considered exempt under SSI and Medicaid rules if it's done correctly. And I will talk a little bit about what a special needs trust means because it is not a one-size-fits-all. And the assets there do not count against the $2,000 limit. But HUD can be different. One of the things I tell everybody is when you deal with one governmental entity, you've dealt with one governmental entity. So what kind of trust do we have? So it's basically breaks down into two general arenas. The first one that we'll talk about is money of the individual. So what are these? Well, somebody's working. Somebody gets given a big gift. The most common ones in kind of the development disability world is some sort of personal injury settlement. I love that gambling proceeds are on here. I hope our kids that have that math ability, they can just count the cards and win all the gambling stuff. And this is the next slide, by the way. Sorry. One more. There we go. I love, maybe we can have kids, bankrupt the casinos. That would be fun. But the big one here that I warn everybody of is inheritance not directed to special needs trust. So I'm going to talk in a little bit about what a third-party special needs trust is. But one of the things we need to educate our family members is don't leave money to our special needs child without talking about how you're doing it. And one of the things I see that happens all the time is the parents have done a great job, and then one of the grandparents leaves the kid 50 grand, and now we've got a big problem. So that's something that I always want people to be aware of, and educate your family members about what's going on. The other situation that this used to be very important for was Social Security, but we're going to talk about ABLE accounts, and that solved a lot of that problem. What happens here sometimes is you apply for Social Security, and you're sitting there and you don't get it, you don't get it, you don't get it. And then magically you get it, and it's $30,000 or $20,000. And then Social Security says, oh, you got too much money, you're off. So that's where you have to watch that. But the tool I'll talk about later, the ABLE account, is probably a better way to do that. All right, next slide. First party special needs trusts, or self-settled special needs trusts, you can use both names. They come in a couple flavors, but we're going to talk about two flavors. And they come under the 42 United States Code 1396. Apparently there's a P in there. And then what I call them, the D4A and the D4C. The D4A is your statutory special needs trust. The D4C is called a pooled trust. As you can see, there's some letters between A and C. There are a couple other trusts in there that we're not going to get into because we don't really use them in Washington. One thing all these trusts have in common is they have a payback provision. So when you create this trust, if the party who is the beneficiary dies, the money goes back to the state. In the D4A, it goes back to the state of Washington, Medicaid, estate recovery. In the D4C, you have a couple options there, and I'll talk about those in a little bit. These trusts can be established by the self, the parent, the grandparent, the guardian, or the court. One of the nice things about it, when I first started practicing in this area of law, the individual could not create their own special needs trust. It had to be a parent, grandparent, guardian, or court. I'm not going to throw courts in other states under the bus. Oh, yes, I am. In where I used to practice, the court would, they flat out told me, we will never allow a first party special needs trust. We do not care if it's allowed. So if we had no parent or grandparents or guardianship, we sometimes ran into a very big problem. I hope they have become more progressive since that happened, but I left there. There may be the ability to create a trust with a power of attorney. I have some issues with that. Some of my colleagues are a little less concerned about that, but that is what it is. The issue I have is if you really parse the trust law, you can't do it, but it does happen, and it's kind of one of those no harm, no fouls. So let's go ahead to the next one. First party or self-settled special needs trust, also known as a grantor trust. No tax ID is required, but I recommend it just because of dealing with benefits, to be totally honest. One of the magic things that happens in this arena, and this is actually a change since I started practicing as well, is you must do it before the age of 65. So if somebody comes in and says, I have a disabled child, they're 66, they cannot do this. They actually also can't do the ABLE. So that's a big problem. So it's good to plan ahead of time. don't leave this to the last minute. Though, if we're planning for our 65-year-olds, you've left that really, really, really to the last minute. First party special needs trusts don't need a separate tax return unless you get an EIN, and then you may want to do it. I am a big fan of always doing it that way, just so you don't have Medicaid causing some problems. That's the next slide, by the way. And then let's skip over to the next one. So there are, as I talked about, the pooled trust. And for the most part, the pooled trust is not something I use. That's the D4C trust. But the difference there is when you do use it, it can funnel back into the pool of other benefits. What it basically is you've got a situation where instead of having one individual trust, they're all pooled together so that all the disabled parties are sharing one thing, which allows much more management. And if we flip to the next slide, there's a couple different pooled trusts that do exist. Lifetime Advocacy Plus is one I've used. The other one on here, Beagle and Associates, I'm not overly familiar with, but let's take a few minutes to talk about the Endowment Trust. The Endowment Trust is set up through the Arc of Washington, and this is something that may be worth considering in certain circumstances. One of the things that I've learned recently is they'll actually do a third-party special needs trust so that you don't have to do it through an attorney, which is interesting because they are substantially cheaper to set up. And I've never really used this with them. I've used them for the pooled or the D4C, but I have never used them for the third party. So that's an interesting thing that I want to explore a little bit, see how this can be done. There is a $600 setup fee for these trusts, but they're currently giving it back, which is unbelievable. That's great news. And I believe that their management fee is $70 or 1%. And again, that is shockingly low compared to, say, a bank. And I was telling Beth Ann earlier today, well, before we got on here, that I was reading up on the Endowment Trust, and I'll give you a link for that in a second. And one of the things they said is they had a parent doing kind of like the the endorsement, and it talked about it's way better than a bank. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I would never even think of using a bank for a disabled party's trust. You're always going to be better having somebody within the industry who understands this stuff. So if you do want to learn a little bit more about this, there is a website, ddetf.wa.gov. And that's the other thing that's nice. It is controlled by the state. And my understanding is this goes really well, and the board is pretty great with all this stuff. So, and they've got some forms and videos and lots of questions. Everybody always wants to do that. Now, one of the things that is the only kind of restriction with this is they must meet the definition of development disability. I'm not really going to go into that much because that's really what we're doing here. That's who we're talking about. But they do have to be a resident of Washington. So if you set one of these up and the child moves, that could cause some problems. Or if you're living somewhere else and you want to set this up, that's a no-go. But be aware of that. Those are kind of the two requirements. Again, have to be under 65. And you have to have a situation where you are a resident of Washington and you have to meet the state disability requirements. So that's my little 2 minutes on our wonderful Arc of Washington Disability Trust. So going to the next slide, third-party special needs trusts do have to have, and this includes, this is the trust that you're creating for your child. So you die, you leave money in trust. It must have an EIN, it must file taxes. It is considered a qualified disability trust for taxes. So rates are not as bad as other trusts, but they're not awesome. And distributions are taxed on the beneficiary's return. Now, the nice thing about this is if you don't want to pay tax at the trust level, you can distribute the money to the disabled beneficiary. If they're not working, that can really lower the tax burden. If they're working, it can still be an issue. But I'm going to be honest, most of our beneficiaries, our individuals, or I'm not really sure what to call them, are not making crazy amounts of money. So we're in a situation where that might be a useful tool. So that is kind of my review of third-party special needs trusts. The reason I do that is, one, just introduce you to the endowment trust, and two, just to have the knowledge that this exists. Now, I'm going to be really, really honest with this. I used to use these a whole heck of a lot more until we got the tool I'm talking about next, and that is the ABLE account. Now, what are the downside with these trusts? Well, first of all, if you're doing them through an attorney, they can get expensive. There are, hoops you need to jump through in order to keep them managed and keep the IRS happy and keep everyone happy. So that can be a pain. And quite honestly, they were difficult to manage for small amounts of money. So if somebody comes to me and says, I'm leaving $1 million to my disabled party, I got no problem charging, thousands of dollars for a special needs trust. But what happened when you had the person that I mentioned before applied for Social Security, got the Social Security, it's $25,000, and now their individual is no longer qualifying for benefits because they're over the $2,000. So that was always a really rough thing. So I'm going to say that the cool thing about this, and if we go to the next slide, is the legislature listened and did something about it. And this isn't the Washington legislature, this was Congress. The federal government actually did something for a change and created the ABLE account. And that is Achieving a Better Life Experience. And basically, it is a disability version of a 529 plan. This is a very powerful tool. And I'll probably be all over the place here and not match the slides, but I'm going to talk about why this is awesome. The first problem that exists, and this is sort of the next slide, to be completely honest, is when you're receiving Medicaid or Social Security, you're in this weird situation that you've got to report all the time. You can't have $2,000. And often, if you're over, they can reduce your benefits. So there's a disincentive to save. So most of us want to put some money aside for a rainy day. Even our disabled individuals might want to do that, or they might want to save up for something expensive. And that was really, really hard to do under the old rules, because you have to go create that really expensive SNT, or you had to do goofy things. One of the things that I've ranted on here about, and I will continue to rant about, is people who would say, oh, I'm not going to leave my disabled child any money. I'll leave all the money to my other child and they'll manage it for them. And they might, but they also might say, wow, Bob left it all to me. Too bad for my sister. I'm keeping all the money. So there's sometimes a disincentive to save there for the individual. So let's go to the next slide. In this situation, and I've got too many confusing slides here, how does ABLE help? And I just want to make sure. I think we jumped one slide. Nope, we did not. Okay. How can ABLE help? The individual, oh, sorry. Okay, I'm looking at too many screens. Okay. What happens with ABLE is the money in the ABLE is disregarded for both Medicaid and SSI. And it's not counted. So this is a really big deal. So if you do have that situation where somebody is over assets by a certain amount of money, they can create an ABLE account. These ABLE accounts are made through the state. They can actually be made through any state. And when we first had these, there was a lot of talk of Washington was going to do it, but they hadn't done it for a while. I think they took like a year to get their situation moving. And people were setting them up in other states because Washington was behind the balls. One thing you can always look at is Washington the best state for me? Or am I thinking that when I retire in 2 years, I'm moving to Idaho? It may be better to look if Idaho has one of these trusts or not. I don't know. I don't practice there, but I know lots of the other states do. I think at this point that we're in a situation where the party can do it in every state, I think. I don't hold me to that, but I think they're now available in every state. Next slide. I think I covered most of this. Saving can be important, the 2,000 limit, and I put very restrictive. I think it's worse than that. And your S&T can be expensive and burdensome for small amounts. And so this is very nice. The other thing with ABLE is we're not as concerned where the money came from. We're still a little bit concerned where the money came from. You know, if your child's out selling drugs, I'm not sure how ABLE will feel about that, but otherwise you're probably okay. So let's move on. Washington has called it stable. Washington State ABLE is available for Washington residents, and I should have put this on here, but I do have, I believe, I'll give you out the, it is, where is this? Oh, where's the website? It is Washington Stable, basically. Washington STATE.able.com is the website, and there's lots of good stuff on there. And this is something that I'll tell you guys, you should probably want to talk to somebody like me before you do it, because there's some requirements, but this is something you can actually do on your own through the website. And it's pretty straightforward, and there's a little bit of fee, but it's not the same amount of fee as if we were setting on SNT. So next slide. One of the issues is you have to be disabled, but if you're receiving SSI, SSDI, or other benefits, you meet that as disabled. If not, you need to have some sort of diagnosis. And right now there's a date, and this should be on the next slide. Right now, you have to be disabled before age 26, and it has to last longer than year. It's not saying benefits have to start before 26. You just have to be disabled before 26. But this is going to change. And I was listening to a presentation on this topic about a month ago, and it's going to, I forget what the new number is going to be, but that's going to be kicked up quite substantially, which makes me very happy. So if you have somebody who is disabled after 26, they can still participate. But right now, for most of our people, they may be set up with an individual or by an authorized legal representative, which could be the guardian or attorney in fact, which is very nice, because I had just said that you had a situation where sometimes power of attorneys are hard for the SNTs. And quite honestly, I think you should be able to do it even without a guardianship or power of attorney. That's a little bit interesting situation. And I talked about powers of attorney last time, but unless you have a profoundly disabled child, it is worth talking with attorneys who are willing to, you know, see if we can do a power of attorney. I'm going to tell you a heartwarming story. I was at Tacoma pro bono, and a young man came in, and he could not sign the power of attorney, so we did it by an X and a thumbprint. Right. And it was great because he understood, he wanted his mom to help him out, but there's a lot of attorneys who might turn him away. And I'm kind of putting together a list of people who are progressive with this and people who are less progressive with this, because you want to talk to somebody who's willing to understand that, you know, everybody doesn't fit in a small box. Okay, next slide. The ABLE is the same as an S&T. It must be used for qualified disability expenses, which is anything that are not necessities. It talks here, it helps them increasing or maintaining their health independence and or quality of life. So I see that's everything from going to Disney to have a good time, to paying for Orca cards so you can travel around town, to a million other things that can be done. Basically, just not necessities. And the nice thing about this is there's never enough money to go around in the disability world. And if you are a disability parent, there's never enough money. And this is a good way to have you save a little money for things that are more important than having to, you know, oh my gosh, we got 20,000 from Social Security. We got to spend this right away. Let's go buy a whole bunch of stuff that we may not need, which has happened in the past. That used to be a very big problem of, you know, just going to buy things that are high ticket in order to get them. Whereas now it gives you an opportunity to put this money into the ABLE account. It can sit there, and then it can be used for other things that maybe are a little bit more increasing the quality of life. So let's switch. This basically, as I said, can be education, housing, transportation, employment, training, basically almost anything. I think an argument fits under this, outside of basic food, clothing, shelter. So it's very broad. And as I said, you can argue almost anything used by an individual is related to their disability. But you should think about it when you're making distributions. Is this what this is for? If you have an ABLE account with 100K in it, maybe you can be a little freer with the money. But if there's only 20,000 in there, you might want to think, I'm going to need this down the road, and how this helps. The big one on there is education. And as Beth Ann had said, one of the things we were talking about before we came on is I am always freaked out that there will come a time that my stepdaughter will have no parents and no me, second parent, around to look after her. And that's a very, very scary thought for me, because I know that her people will watch out for her, but what happens down the road? And I know a lot of us with children with disabilities may not have other children to help out. We may not have children that want to help out. And I'm always a big fan of let's kind of sock this away for the future. So next slide. The Department of Treasury is responsible for ensuring the funds in an ABLE account are being used appropriately. They may do periodic audits. As said, they're supposed to do periodic audits. I've never heard of them doing one. As I said, I was on a seminar that one of the representatives was there. It was a tad disturbing. She was new to the job, and most of the people in the audience knew more than she did. But she was learning, and I guess when you go to a new job, you got to learn. I've not heard of any audits, but I expect that will come in someday. All right, moving on. There is a penalty if you use the things for the wrong things. But as long as the income, as long as everything's being used appropriately, it is tax-free. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. And also the other penalty is if you use the things for the wrong time, you might lose your SSI and Medicaid. I'm not sure how that will happen, because right now neither Medicaid or SSI really are looking at ABLEs. They're saying, oh, you got one, it's good. They're not digging into how it's managed. They're just looking at, does it exist, and are you using it appropriately? So I would be worried. I'm still trying to figure out, and maybe you guys can help me with this, about the only thing I can think of that might not fit a qualified disability expense. Again, might be going back to gambling. But then there's probably somebody out there who can figure out a reason that would fit. But I think most things we're really going to use the money for will fit. The big things that are a problem: do not be putting the money in your pocket. Do not be giving the money to you. Do not be paying your rent out of the ABLE account. Pay the rent out of their SSI or their income. So watch what's coming to you. And one of the things I tell everybody is this is still a fiduciary relationship. You are still managing this money for the best interest of the disabled person, and this is not your own piggy bank. I think for most of us who live this every day, we wouldn't be doing this, but maybe somebody down the road thinks they can do that. So let's switch to the next one.
Still not clear.
Okay.
Just a minute, James, there was a problem with advancing the slides, so I'm gonna.
Yeah, I'm looking here.
Reshare.
I was looking here. Am I done? Because there's
No,
not.
no, you're not done.
As I've done in the past.
Yeah, let me get that. I know you're reading off of something, so go ahead, and I'm gonna try and get that back up for you.
Okay, that's fine. So I'm just going to kind of go back here. Okay, so a couple characteristics that are important. One of the big ones is you can only have one ABLE account, and it cannot hold anything other than cash. So it's not something that you can put a house or a car in. So if you are planning for the future and you have a house that you want to go into the ABLE account, good luck. I'm not sure how we're going to do that. That needs to be an SNT. But if you have a vehicle, that could fit. And the reason for that is this has an $18,000 maximum annual contribution. And that's total. Where that number comes from is it comes from the annual gift amount. And that's where that comes. It'll go up a little bit every year, but you can't just park hundreds of thousands of dollars in there. So one thing I warn people about is, say you get, oh, we'll just sell the house and we'll put it in the ABLE account. No, do a third-party SNT. That's going to help, because I am pretty sure there is not a single piece of property in the state of Washington that's worth $18,000 or less. That is my challenge to you. If you find one, let me know. A car, maybe you could do that if the car is donated to the child or inherited by the child. It could be sold and the money could go into the ABLE account. One of the other big basics that comes into play is this is limited at $100,000 for SSI. So you have a situation where an individual receives money. If they go over that, they're going to lose their Social Security benefits, but they may still stay on for Medicaid. I tell everybody when I'm talking about all these things, it's a Venn diagram where they all intersect. They're all related, they're all intersecting, but they all have their own rules. So SSI and Medicaid are different there, but be aware it is limited at $100,000. The good news is at $18,000 a year, that's 5 years away. I don't like to do math. It's actually a little bit more than 5 years, but it allows you to put some money in there, and hopefully you're spending it as time is going on. Again, disability must have occurred prior to age 26. This is set to change, and it's going to be higher. And I'm sorry, the one thing I don't know is when that is set to change. And for SSI, SSA Medicaid recipients, if they meet the onset requirements, they're eligible. You have to have significant disabilities. This is why one of the things I tell everybody to do, especially with our kiddos who are under 18, is be ready to apply once they turn 18 for SSI to get this kind of rolling. And Beth Ann educated me, wait a month, because if you apply the day they turn 18, they count your income. If you wait a month or longer, they don't count your income. So that's a really useful tool. And if you're setting this up, so I had somebody come in who asked me, should I set up the ABLE account now? And I'm like, well, you can. There's no real negative of doing that. You got to put a little money in it. But quite honestly, what I tell everybody is wait to see what Social Security does to you. Just, apply for Social Security the year they're 18, preferably at least a month after they turn 18, and see how long that takes, because my expectation it'll take some time and you're going to get some back money back, and then you're going to need to do the ABLE account. I think a lot of people would like to have it set up so that it's just sitting there, it's in the holster. I don't think that's a terrible idea. I'm also, I hate to say it, a little bit of a procrastinator. So I would make, and the other thing is time is so limited, there's never enough time in the day. What I would be looking at with disabled children, if you wanted a timeline, is they turn 18, power of attorney, see if they can do a power of attorney. That's number one. If power of attorney is not a possibility, consider guardianship if that's necessary. Not saying it is. And conservatorship, for most of our kiddos, they don't have much money, so I'm not really concerned about that. So those are the first projects. A month out or 2 months out, get the Social Security taken care of. After that is when you start looking at the ABLE. So it's not something you need in your pocket right away. I'd put it as the kind of the third or fourth thing down the road. All right, let's talk about the advantages. The major advantage is it's easier and substantially less expensive to open and use than a trust. It does provide tax benefits, and it will allow the person with a disability some control over the account. I prefer to do that a little bit differently, especially if we have somebody who is not under guardianship. I think one of the things we should be doing is having some sort of an account with a little bit of money for the disabled individual in it, so that they can have a debit card, and if they go to McDonald's or go wherever they want to go, they can pay for some of their bills. I wouldn't really want to be doing it out of the ABLE. That ABLE could be a fund for those funds, but I like the idea of giving them some agency in trying to deal with that. That could also be a little bit scary, and I have dealt with many children who are dealing with the fact that they can get out in the society, but somebody says the cheeseburger will be $5, they hand them a 20, though quite honestly cheeseburgers are getting to $20. So I think we still have to manage that and watch that, but we've got to be, I want to give them as much agency as we can. Now let's go to the next one. Next slide. We can, they can buy their own stuff. They can do that. Now, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. And somebody asked me this. Housing can get difficult. My preference, and this is a preference, is not to use it for housing. And if you're using it for housing, what I would always try to do is use their SSI money first. However, I don't know if you've looked at housing. It usually cannot be met by what most people use with SSI. So it may be able to come out of the ABLE account. What my struggle with that is $18,000 with the way housing is here will be exhausted pretty quickly. So I prefer to use it for other things, but it can be used for housing expenses. My preference is don't. And I want to see what that question was. Hold on one second, because somebody had thrown a question in the chat. Housing is listed as you can use ABLE. I also heard not to use ABLE for rent. So my preference is not to use ABLE for rent. It can be done. I'm just worried you're going to blow through that money. Now, if you've got an ABLE account with 100K in there and want to use it, feel free. It's not going to hurt anything. But I prefer not to. I prefer to use Social Security for rent, especially if they're living at home. If they're in a third-party situation, I think we have a little bit more flexibility there. You're in a group home or in those situations. But if you're living at, mom and dad's house, I would try not to do that, because I don't want somebody coming in saying, hey, we got a problem. All right, other advantages. There is no limit on contributions, asterisks. If you're on Social Security, there's that $100,000 limit. This does not require, sorry, I'm skipping ahead. I'm misreading here. Special needs trust. The advantage is there's no limit on contributions. You can put $100 million in there if you want. The disability doesn't have to be begun before 26, but as I said, that's changing, so that one might go away. And if it's a third-party trust, there is no state recovery. You don't have to worry about it going back to the state. Some states have said, and I'm a cynic, that they will not do a state recovery out of an ABLE account. I'll be really, really honest with you. I have not had anybody with an ABLE account pass away yet, thank goodness. I'm in a situation where I like to see how things work before we go there. The big disadvantage of the SNT is cost. So an ABLE account is a few $100s to set up. An SNT is a few $1,000s to set up. So that's a big issue there. I also like not having the payback. Going to the next slide. Another issue that, and this is starting to parse words, the SNT just has to be for the benefit of the individual, not qualified disability expense. The interesting thing with that is I'm not sure the difference between those words. There probably is an argument out there, and certain things clearly are disability expenses. Training, education, all that kind of stuff clearly is. But like, if you go to, I'm trying to think something, you go to the local community center and you take a 3D printing class, is that for the benefit of the beneficiary, or is that qualified disability expense? I think I'd argue it's both. But that's an interesting question. The other advantage of the SNT is there is no maximum amount, and you can hold your vehicles and property. So you can put a vehicle in there, and the trustee usually is going to be somebody so there's a little bit more flexibility there. Big thing I will again rant is that we do have a situation where I don't always feel institutional trustees are the right people to do that. There are trustees that deal in our area here. They are great, but I would never name, Key Private Bank or any other bank as a beneficiary under an SNT, simply because it makes me very nervous that they're going to look more at, we want money under management, and they don't really understand this. If I was a billionaire, maybe I would try to create my own financial institution that understands disability. It is a growing arena. If a bank was smart and didn't have bank culture, I think they would look at what the ARC and other parties are doing and start to offer a competitor. The nice thing with the ARC and the ABLE is these are state controlled, state supervised situations. So in theory, you're in a situation where, you know, you've got a little bit more oversight, and we can go back to the other slide. I'm just kind of freestyling here. One thing I will say is ABLE will allow for savings that aren't previously allowed. What I think of it is, and I'm not saying this in calling anybody, it's kind of a poor man's special needs trust, because you can do it with less money, the cost is less, and it's great when you have a disabled person with that $15,000, or somebody, where I love it is somebody really screws up, grandma leaves $10,000 to the disabled individual. They now have a tool that this just doesn't screw up their benefits. They can throw it in the ABLE account. Or you've got somebody with that whole Social Security dance, which drives me up a wall. You'd think that they would understand how to do this by now, where you get the $15,000, you're off benefits, you can throw that in the ABLE, you get on benefits. And I think it allows an increase in the quality of life of the individual. And my big thing is we want people to have agency. That's not to say that you might have both. One of the things that's interesting is you may have an ABLE account, and then you have a situation where a party passes away. Let's say a parent passes away, and then they have a special needs trust in their will, or a freestanding special needs trust. So you may have a situation where an individual can have both, and that's useful. Or you've got a situation where somebody, you know, does something really dumb and then, you know, leaves a house to a disabled individual. That can be a problem, though technically under Medicaid rules that shouldn't be a problem because they need to live there. So if you have a situation where the individual is living in a house and somebody leaves them that house, that should be exempt. But if they leave them a second house, that can be a real problem. I've got a case right now where we have a disabled individual. He's got 2 properties, and that's becoming an issue. Okay, I think that's kind of what I have prepared. So let's turn this off. I've already got a couple questions for when the recording turns.